the Biden of this campaign, as much as he's an old man who's clearly
70. Was he 77?
78, I think.
78.
Yeah, and who clearly is not as articulate as he once was.
And he's found it quite hard to counter
To
her,
the extent
I
that he
think.
was once.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he has his own unique way of expressing himself. But I mean, he gave a speech to the New York, the sort of high rollers in Wall Street,
the New York Economic Club.
And it, just listening to it, it reminded me of the notorious pig speech by Boris Johnson.
Yes. Well, it was, actually, in some ways, it was worse.
Yeah.
I mean, Boris Johnson's Peppa Pig speech featured all sorts of little additions which just seemed infantile and pointless, diversions of what he was saying. Donald Trump was saying stuff which, to an economically literate audience, which was nonsensical. TV debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. And you guys, I know you like your American politics. It's going to be such a moment, isn't it? Another defining moment, Adam.
Yeah, people were saying, debates are boring, they don't really change very much, and don't think we actually distinguished ourselves with debates during the recent election campaign over here. People, again, were saying that about the United States, that they'd just become routine and didn't matter what you did. Thinking back to Donald Trump's, the way he treated Hillary Clinton didn't in the end affect the result. But we had that encounter at the end of June, which basically knocked Joe Biden out of the race for the presidency and opened the door to Kamala Harris. Now, Tuesday night, we've got Kamala Harris as the Democratic candidate actually meeting Donald Trump for the first time. The two of them have never spoken to each other. They've only ever been in the same chamber of Congress. So that in itself is, if you want the drama of face-off, is pretty dramatic. But where people differ as to who has the most to lose in this encounter. Now, obviously, if Kamala Harris was an absolute disaster, that would be bad. But there's nothing in her record which suggests that she will be an absolute disaster. And my feeling is that at the moment, the momentum, I mean, we can argue about the polls, but she's certainly pulled up on where Biden was, that the momentum is with her. And actually, I think all the pressure is on Trump to show that he can, he would like to show that he can beat her, dismiss her. After all, he's called her dumb and a bum and says she doesn't know anything. So if she actually, throws that back in his face, that would be bad for him. But he needs to be, the whole Trump thing depends on looking like a winner. And I think the question is whether he can come out of this looking like a winner tomorrow and possibly halt the momentum now developing behind Harris.
And to give credit where it's due, or half due, to you, Adam, it was some months ago, I think around maybe, I don't know, when was it, last Christmas, when you told us, you didn't just feel it was possible, you put money on the next American election featuring neither of the candidates.
Well, I said I wouldn't have them both, yeah.
Oh, did you? So in which case you won your bet.
Yeah, well, I my prediction was correct because I just felt both of them were so flawed. And also, I do think there's a thing about presidential elections, but a thing about, the United States. United States likes novelty, and this was such a, Biden-Trump was such a rematch.
Yeah.
I just couldn't see.
But we won't nitpick over polls, although the latest polls, New York Times, show some levelling off of Kamala Harris's spike ahead of this debate. And I think part of the argument from people like Nate Silver, who's a leading poll analyst, is that the change of leader had the effects, and maybe a bit more, of a convention. So they got the convention bounce before the convention. There hasn't been very much of a convention bounce in the polls, but you're right, made up an awful lot of ground. Tuesday night, Wednesday early morning is going to be so big. And I don't know, this is where we get into the realms of just chit-chat, speculation. I wonder how that's going to play out. It is definitely going to be good to see, to the extent that it's done in this debate, and it can be done by Donald Trump. It's going to be good to see her positions on policy tested more than they maybe have been. She gave a proper interview quite recently, and there are questions still to be asked. So I think that's a very valid point to make. On the other, Donald Trump. I mean, he does speak pretty freely to those bits of the media that he wants to speak to, and he gives all sorts of news conferences and certainly plenty of rallies, and a lot of it is false, incoherent, and nonsensical. I mean, and it seems to be priced in. by so many voters as well as by a chunk of the media.
Yeah, so I think that's why this will be really interesting, because it will be, is it about policy? Is it about rhetoric? Is it about landing those zingers? And that might be made more difficult by the fact that there is a mute button involved here. So it's not going to be a, clambering over one another kind of a debate. But I think Adam's right. It's really Donald Trump who has quite a lot on the line here. And there were many who thought when he was shot, well, that's it, he's going to run away with this election. There's no one who can stop him. And actually that the narrative and the momentum would be so behind him that it was almost a waste of time talking about it. And in fact, that hasn't quite gone that way. I think Kamala Harris is part of it. But there are some commentators who believe that Trump has really suffered actually as a result of what did happen to him, and that he hasn't yet recovered his mojo. And so I think this will be a major moment for him, for his campaign, for policy, yes, but also to see if he still has that sparkle that is, for some people, very attractive. For others, a deep turn off, you're right, but is the reason why a lot of people did flock to him in the first place. And I think without that, it's difficult to see what he really does have if he doesn't have a policy platform that's coherent.
Yeah.
Also, he is now the Biden of this campaign, as much as he's an old man who's clearly
70, was he 77?
78, I think.
78.
Yeah, and who clearly is not as articulate as he once was.
And he's found it quite hard to counter
To the
her, I
extent that he
think.
was once.
Yeah, well, I mean, he has his own unique way of expressing himself. But I mean, he gave a speech to the New York, the sort of high rollers in Wall Street,
the New York Economic Club.
and it just listening to it, it reminded me of the notorious pig speech by Boris Johnson.
Yes. Well, actually, in some ways, it was worse.
Yeah.
I mean, Boris Johnson's Peppa Pig speech featured all sorts of little additions which just seemed infantile and pointless, diversions of what he was saying. Donald Trump was saying stuff which, to an economically literate audience, which was nonsensical.
Yeah.
He was talking about raising trillions of dollars. He discussed this at length, raising trillions of dollars by means of tariffs on countries, especially China. Well, they do not have that effect.
Yeah.
They're paid by importers and passed on to consumers, and they're inflationary.
Which is why I think if it does turn to a policy discussion and he can't bring that real heft, especially without the mute button involved, which means that he can't talk over, he can't, hit back with those one-liners, it's very difficult to see how he could make an impact, and I think he has to.
The mystery remains why he's still such a strong contender.
Yes.
Because everyone would say this is on a knife edge. I mean, he's partly helped in a big way by the Electoral College in the United States,
Yes.
but I think the rest of the world is just absolutely aghast.
Yeah, it is a kind of a world unto itself. And you use the word mystery. In some ways, it is not a mystery. It is a cultural divide which is just so deep that it accounts for that. Some of the things that Donald Trump has done and said this weekend, let alone every other weekend going back as far as you like, if a tenth of that had been replicated by the Democratic runner, they would have been toast. But Donald Trump marches on because it's not just about policy.
No, it's true. It's not just about policy, it's about character. And I think, for Kamala Harris, there are a lot of people who don't yet know who she is, don't yet really understand kind of what she's about. There's even questions about her accent, whether her accent's real or fake and that kind of thing. So she's got things she's got to counter too. And she has got to get people to understand what she's about and who she is. But I think for Trump, again, the stakes are just far higher, especially as Adam says, given that he is now the older candidate and he doesn't seem to have been able to land a coherent strategy against her in the way that he could against Biden.
And it's a plus for her to be seen, which isn't necessarily
exactly,
the case.
which isn't the same for
He's
Trump.
been seen plenty.
Another feature of the polling, and it's common to what's going on in American politics, to our politics, to European politics, the same phenomenon in the German election and the French election. And I wish we had more time to talk about it. I'll pick it up tomorrow as well.